There have been a very long line of handhelds that held a very special place in gamers' hearts everywhere. And two of the most primary examples of this is the Nintendo 3DS and the PS Vita, two handhelds that hold pretty much legendary status. 3DS being famous for carrying Nintendo through one of their most trying times during the Wii U generation, and the PS Vita famous for being one of Sony's most tragic failures, a device full of so much potential, but completely squandered by Sony. And with the sunsetting of the 3DS eShop a couple years ago now, and Sony all but just killing the Vita multiple times over the last several years, with the dropping of support of both these systems, the future of these handhelds have been completely carried by the community, enabling some amazing things, and has really inspired so many people to buy one of these handhelds for the very first time. But then that begs the question, the time-honored question, the question that is asked inevitably, which should you buy? Which is the best one for you? PS Vita versus Nintendo 3DS. This has been a question asked for pretty much since these devices first came out in like 2011, 2012. Both devices can offer you amazing experiences, but it really depends on what you really want out of this device. If you want a killer library, but you don't really care about emulation, but you do want the classics, the 3DS is a pretty solid choice. Capable of emulation all the way up until N64 and PS1, though N64 isn't great. In PS1, at least on my device, in the past though, people have commented that PS1 emulation actually works quite well on the 3DS, so it just could be something that I screwed up during the installation process, but I don't really play a lot of PS1 games outside of like Rayman and Mega Man and whatnot, so I don't actually have a huge PS1 library that I'm concerned about. The Vita, while some might debate whether or not its first-party library is better or not, that's not what this video is about, but what it is capable of doing is far deeper amounts of emulation and something truly amazing, a huge plethora of Android ports, of classic Android games. Call of Duty Zombies, and for a more recent title that's been ported, is Ultimate Spider-Man Total Mayhem, truly classic Android games from the early 2010s. There are even ports of Switch games. I personally have played a lot of Sonic Mania on my PS Vita, which you can also do that on the 3DS, but it just felt more at home on the PS Vita. It definitely feels like the kind of game you would find yourself playing on that device. When it comes to emulation in particular on the PS Vita, it is a pretty solid experience, capable of as well all the way up until N64, PS1 obviously, natively, and PSP, which is honestly amazing. If you have a PSP or have ever wanted to try PSP, the PS Vita is one of the greatest ways to play those games, having native support through Adrenaline, as well as PS1 games. PS1 games also pretty much natively work on the Vita, and it's an amazing experience. So those are game systems that you really don't have to think about when emulating them. But for systems like the N64, some games are hit and miss. You can pretty much enjoy Mario 64 amazingly. You can even do Mario Kart. But some games don't exactly run well, like Rayman 2: The Great Escape kind of chugs. Smash Brothers completely crashed. So not every single game will work, but the games that do are still amazing and they run pretty well. Something that doesn't work on my Vita for some reason, but I have seen work before and run well, is Dreamcast emulation. And of course, you can get things like RetroArch to play anything you want from Sega Genesis, Super Nintendo, NES, Game Boy, Game Boy Advance, pretty much anything under the moon you would want to play on this thing, you theoretically could. The 3DS is a great device. I love its design. It is by far one of my favorite devices, and it's one of my things that I've used the longest. I originally got my 3DS about when they first released, and I love this thing. I have every version of the 3DS because it's something that I truly enjoyed. I love being able to play Pokemon, and with things like the eShop giving you unfettered access to the entire 3DS eShop, it is honestly one of the best gaming experience you could have, especially because you can find an original 3DS for an incredible price, usually around $50 to $100, depending on how much you want to spend and how patient you are when you're searching for a good deal. Bear in mind though, that is for the original 3DS, not the 3DS XL, the new 3DS XL, or any other such revisions. The Vita has a very similar equivalent to the HShop, where you essentially just download pretty much whatever Vita game you'd want, but the HShop to me is just a lot cleaner to navigate in comparison. Instead of just having a huge list of games you have to parse through, you can search and have filters and stuff to help narrow down what you want to look for. The 3DS also just has more native support for its classic consoles through the Virtual Console. You have games from the Super Nintendo, NES, certain GBA games, Game Boy Color, original Game Boy. You have pretty much all the 8 and 16-bit and handheld systems that Nintendo released. Sure, you don't have the whole catalogs for every system, but they have the main titles that you were most likely going to emulate anyways, so might as well play with them in native forms rather than going through all the trouble of emulating them. There are reasons you might want to emulate them instead, especially if you have like a save that you're transferring over, but in my experience, I don't ever really finish these kinds of games. I just pop in, play for a bit, then pop out. And that's the beauty of the 3DS. Since it is a, folding form factor, you can just close it up, slide into your pocket, and you don't need to even worry about it getting damaged or anything in your pocket. I've never been too worried about the Vita when I put it in my pocket, but having exposed analog sticks does kind of suck, but they are pretty low profile, so I've never been too worried. Something very important to take in consideration when you're choosing between these two handhelds is your budget. You could expect to pay anywhere between $120 up to $400 for a PS Vita, depending on the make and model version you want. If you want the OLED screen in a certain colorway, it's gonna cost you a pretty penny. But if you're cool with getting a Japanese imported original PS Vita or PS Vita 2000, you can spend pretty much $120 on that and you'd be good to go. You can even find them on Amazon still. Same thing for the 3DS, but it would be significantly more expensive on that platform opposed to something like eBay. When it comes to the 3DS, like I mentioned before, you can pretty much find the models of 3DS between $50 and $400-ish depending on what you want. If you want the very best the 3DS could offer, that's the new 3DS XL and the new Nintendo 2DS XL, which both have variants and special editions that can be incredibly expensive because they were rare or just not particularly common. So if you just want the bare bones, simple best, that's like getting a black new 3DS XL, and that's going to be around $150 to $200. But to me, the sweet spot is an original 3DS XL because the extra performance isn't very necessary, and if you want to emulate those games like the Super Nintendo and stuff, which were exclusive to the new 3DSs from the Virtual Console, you can just use RetroArch on the 3DS instead. So it doesn't necessarily matter to have that little bit extra performance that is gatekept from you by enabling you to play those Super Nintendo games. And there's an assortment of other small things, but generally speaking, it doesn't really matter all that much, and it's pretty inconsequential to the overall experience. I've been pretty consistently able to find original Nintendo 3DS XLs that were region-free around the $100 and $120 price point for nice quality, A and B class, just overall nicer quality handhelds fairly easily because they're just generally available. It also helps that this is probably one of the most popular variants of the 3DS, so there is just a lot out there on the market. Now, which one should you buy in particular? Well, I say the PS Vita is the best device for those who want to commit to more of the emulation side of things, or more handy with tech and computers and stuff to handle the more just nitty-gritty of it all when it comes to the Vita, because the Vita isn't hard to mod, it's just a little bit more tedious than the 3DS. And if you want a simple experience and a pretty easy modding experience, it takes like 15 minutes to mod a 3DS. It is a pretty simple process nowadays. And if you don't really care about emulation all that much, honestly, the 3DS is probably the best device for that purpose, because it has an amazing native catalog of DS and 3DS titles. But it is basically down to preference whether or not you would prefer the library of the Vita over the 3DS, because this video isn't really about their first-party libraries, but that could be a massive deciding factor for people who are choosing between these two devices. For me personally, my favorite is the 3DS. It's just the one I've spent the most time with and just has the most childhood memories associated with it. But I would love to hear what you guys think. Which one would you buy? I would love to hear what you guys think about this down below. Don't forget to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. All the other social media garbage down below. And last but not least, have a wonderful day.